If you're struggling to build momentum with your music, it probably has something in parts to do with divergent thinking, or in other words, creative brain. As a creative, there are so many things that make up the amazing parts of what you do. The ability to be able to create or inspire or problem solve. This is part of divergent thinking. The problem here is these things that make up your amazing creative brain also mean there are side effects. The old Newton's law, for every action there's an equal opposite reaction. And so in the other side of things, you also have the anxiety, the perfectionism, the overthinking, and one of those things is what I call the creation loop. Now, the creation or creative cycle, which turns into a creative loop, usually starts with excitement and dopamine when you start something. Then you start to build, and if you don't see the results that you want to achieve, the next thing comes with frustration, which leads into inconsistencies, which leads to a lack or a loss of dopamine, and then you start something new, which gets more dopamine, and it goes round and round in circles. Many people call this shiny new object syndrome, and you see it a lot with creatives, but you really see it a lot in the music industry. I am always talking to artists who say things like, the best thing about my writing is I'm very, very versatile. And then when I go and listen to the music, the problem we have is there's lots of different styles of music, even different genres. And of course, versatility when it comes to being an artist isn't the name of the game. You see it a lot with socials, where I'll go into someone's socials to analyze what they're doing, only to be confronted with a lot of things that have been thrown at the wall. And you've got things like, sometimes people will say, well, I'll play my music to strangers because I've seen that works on TikTok, and maybe we'll play some games and do some other stuff of styles of music, or maybe we'll do some covers, or maybe we'll do some mimed videos, or possibly we'll do some performance videos. Now, individually, all of these things can work, but it doesn't answer the question for the consumer of, what do I get? If I come into your house, if I come into your socials, what am I going to get? If the answer is, well, the great thing about it is I'm so creative, I throw loads of things out there to see what works. Now, that's great for you and your creative brain, but usually it doesn't fit in with the consistency of the consumer coming back time and again. Now, this is where divergent versus convergent thinking comes in. As a creative, you probably lean more heavily into divergent thinking or a creative brain, which is why you are so good at solving problems. Think about it. When a problem comes up, your brain starts to go into all of the different ways and ideas and thoughts that you can solve a problem, which means you have all of the creative ideas, but possibly you don't lean too much into the completer finisher to get things sorted. Now, this is where convergent thinking comes in, which is the practical side. So you have your creative brain versus your practical brain. Now, your practical brain is the completer finisher. Your practical brain is saying, hang on a minute, instead of doing all of the changes, let's work on evolving and improving something, which is a very boring way of thinking when your brain is stuck in divergent thinking. You see, your creative brain or divergent thinking, it seeks that kind of newness. It seeks the excitement. It seeks the novelty. It rewards the brain with dopamine when you are doing interesting and fun, exciting things. When that idea becomes routine and it requires repetition, it loses the excitement, it loses the dopamine, and then a fresh start gives it a new dopamine hit. Now, fear not, because most creatives fit into divergent thinking or a creative brain, but there are sort of allowable times, and then there's times which we need to be in the convergent thinking or the practical brain so that we're not on a loop, because the loop gets more frustrating because you can do that 3, 4, 5, 6 times, but after a while you're not seeing results and that becomes frustrating. And most creatives' identity is wrapped up in their work and, more importantly, the outcome rather than the process itself. We're after getting to the end. We're not necessarily thinking about the process, the journey, and what we are doing, even though we do want to enjoy it. So if it isn't working, we have a tendency to start again, which also then preserves our ego instead of fixing what isn't working. And therefore, what we tend to look at is ways that we can start again to bring in that dopamine hit. Hey gang, we're going back to the video in just a minute, but I wanted to tell you about DK Music Business Academy. This is a platform that I have created for artists that are serious about their music. There are over 100 hours worth of lessons, and with every course comes a workbook, checklist, templates, tips, tricks, and strategies that myself and my team use every single day when helping artists and labels from around the world. And not only that, but there's a lot more detail involved in the courses than I have in other social media platforms. In reality, if I go into too much detail in a YouTube video, it does damage retention because most people just don't have that much time or attention to detail. So if you're struggling to get the attention on your music that it deserves, just think how powerful this could be for your music and your music career. And at the price of just one Big Mac burger per week, you'll get access to all of my tools, my techniques, my strategies that myself and my team use, as well as access to myself and my team in the community. So don't struggle on your own, get the help that you need to get your music heard. There's a link in the description, and I look forward to seeing you in DK Music Business Academy. So how do we break the cycle and escape that loop? In other words, how do we stop starting again? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing this. And number one is identifying allowable creatives. What areas are you allowed to be creative or allowing yourself to be creative? And what areas are you saying that is not the area that I need to reinvent the wheel? And one of those areas I do think is social media. I think there's too much creativity that goes on in social media because everything needs to be creative. One thing I would say is, does your social media need to be good? Does it need to do a job? Or does it need to be creative for the sake of creative's sake? The problem with being creative is it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy. Whereas doing some research, finding some ideas, stealing the best ideas, and then working on evolution, in other words, how to make something better every day instead of how to make something completely new, to me, that is much more important. So to me, social media is not your allowable creatives. You as an artist and your songwriting, absolutely. That's the time where you can be as creative as you want to be and let those creative juices flowing. Number two, commit to how many times you are going to let the loop start again. If, for example, you're feeling like something's not working and you crave that dopamine hit of a fresh start, that's fine. But there has to be a number of times before we say, hang on, this just isn't good enough yet. And rather than starting again, what I need to do is I need to spend time perfecting what I do. We always have a phrase which is genius is in the attention to detail, which isn't genius is in starting a million times over. Genius is in perfecting something. Genius isn't in making 1,000 average or bad things. But that's where discipline comes in, and this is difficult for a divergent thinker, for a creative brain. So you have to be disciplined. You have to be able to recognize when you are starting the loop again, because you are wasting time, you are wasting energy, and there are so many ways that you could build your career if we can break that cycle and break that loop. Number three, stick to the classic 80-20 rule. 80% of your time should be on routine and consistency, and 20% should be on innovation and creativity. Don't forget, a life of curveballs don't usually hit, whereas taking some of the creative and some of the curveballs and then ensure you're spending most of your time on getting your music heard and building your brand, that will build you much, much faster than some kind of lottery-based win basing everything off creativity. And lastly, and I think most importantly, instead of new titles, I would like you to name things 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. If you're numbering things in this way, it shows an evolution rather than a change. For example, if you're saying content shoot 2.0, content shoot 3.0. Every single time you're going into 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, you're now making tweaks, you're making changes because you can see that evolution. Rather than let's just go on another content shoot and do this new song. Rather than let's go and try something completely different with our content, or let's go and try a completely different studio, a completely different producer, a completely different genre, or a completely different song. What about if we take that song and we do the same song, but we say, hang on a minute, the world hasn't heard this song, so why can't we make 2.0? And that's going to be a clear improvement that we can then take to market. The positives of divergent thinking are absolutely huge. You have the power to inspire people, to entertain people, to change people's lives, to speak to people, to trigger emotions in them that they weren't expecting just because of your talent and your message. The downsides of that is the anxiety, the overthinking, the perfectionism, and more importantly, the creative loop, where you go round and round getting more and more frustrated, searching for the dopamine instead of searching to break the loop in order to build out of this creative loop, to build more of an audience and get your music heard. So if you feel like you're stuck in a loop, if you're going round in circles doing the same things, it might be to do with divergent thinking, and maybe you need a bit more practical brain. Maybe you need to find someone to even help you with this. But if you can get the balance between divergent thinking and convergent thinking when you are building your music release strategy, you will probably find that you will get 10 times further, 10 times quicker. Anyway, something I was thinking about. Hope this helps. I'll see you again soon.